A social worker discovered a 13-year-old girl who was still in diapers and whimpered like an animal.
Clearly something was terribly wrong. She didn't speak. She was completely unkempt. She could hardly walk. She could hardly balance.
Genie, as the child was named, had suffered a horrific ordeal.
We learned after she was found from interviews with her mother, from some drawings that Jeannie made, that she had been kept isolated in a room at the back of a house. In this room there was a potty seat to which she had been harnessed without any clothes, just naked, and left to sit there day and night. She was in this room for 12 and a half years.
Jeannie's father was mentally unstable. He had decided to hide his daughter from the world.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes.
Why did you keep your daughter in a room?
Mr. Wiley has no comment.
No comment.
We haven't had time to discuss the charges. We haven't even seen them.
What about this one?
Jeannie's parents were charged with willful abuse. 15 minutes before he was due in court, her father committed suicide, but the damage to Jeannie was already done. She had spent her childhood in almost total isolation. Her brain had been deprived of a nurturing environment and left to grow in solitude. The effect was devastating. Jeannie had the mental age of an 18-month-old infant, unable to talk. But to science, she offered a unique opportunity, a chance to separate the effects of nature and nurture on a child's brain. The big question was, would Jeannie be able to catch up? Susie Curtis was a young linguist when she began to work with Jeannie 5 days a week.
Food is for. She was hard to be with. She did not know how to swallow very well, so she would salivate and just spit. So I would come home drenched in her saliva. There were lots of things that were very, very difficult and unpleasant, but nonetheless, she was just entirely captivating. The way she moved her hands, the way she just moved her body and her face, her eyes, that just seemed to be incredibly expressive and hold the world within them.
Susie soon discovered that Jeannie was highly intelligent and extremely curious about the world.
I was really hopeful because she was just insatiable. She wanted to know the word for everything. And her assumption was that everything had its own label. Every shade of color had its own label. And so she wanted to learn the label for everything in her world. It's dark, yes. She continued to develop a huge vocabulary. I could no longer keep track of what she knew. And she continued to be able to string words together. Buy applesauce store, or buy more applesauce store, which meant buy more applesauce at the store.
Oh, Mama.
Let me see. The log?
Oh, Mama.
But the little bits and pieces of English that take those words and transform them into a grammatical sentence never came in. All the question words like who, what, where, why, when, never. She never had any of them. Pronouns like he, she, it, they, him, her, not in her vocabulary.
Here, you do it. Put them in the box.
And so despite all the years that I was with her, where I saw lots of growth in lots of other areas, she didn't ever learn the grammar of English.
Jeannie never absorbed the fundamental rules of language. Her brain had missed this critical stage of development. In the first years of life, the main job of the brain is to make sure all the brain cells are wired correctly. Surprisingly, it's not just a matter of making connections, but cutting them. A 3-year-old has twice as many connections between brain cells as a grown-up, but they're jumbled and chaotic. To work properly, the brain must decide which connections to keep and which to cut. Trillions of connections need to be checked, so the brain uses a brutal but effective rule. Use it or lose it. Because Jeannie's parents rarely spoke to her, the parts of her brain responsible for grammar were not stimulated and were crippled for life. Jeannie's story didn't have a happy ending. She went through a string of foster homes, was abused in one, and stopped talking at all. She now lives in an adult care home in California. Jeannie's experience was extreme, but her case taught us that once a critical window of brain development has passed, there's no going back. Friday. Science has shown us that a growing brain is both vulnerable and extremely malleable. Mark Yu's mother, Chloe, used this to their advantage to teach him one of the most complex languages in the world.
Yan, that means a person. We have two legs.